right, so let's go on with part 3.
And every time they tried to impose something on him, he would basically say, I followed all the state laws, and the federal government has no jurisdiction on this land. And the federal government didn't know what to do with him. And I want to explain to, especially to the ranchers and to the land users in this room, something that protected my dad. There's a couple things that protected my dad. I'm going to mention 3 of them. One was my dad would not sign a grazing permit, which is a contract. That's all it is. He understood, after all this study that him and the rancher did, he understood that the federal government does not have jurisdiction over the land and the resources. That they're actually acting outside the Constitution when they do so. He understood that. So therefore, he knew that the only power they had was when you give it to them by signing a contract. A contract is what? It's this. It's, I agree to do this, you agree to do this, and if we violate that, or I violate it, their contracts are like, if you violate that, this is the punishment. And so what would happen was, the other ranchers and ranchers all over the West would sign these grazing contracts, and it says right there, that you have to obey us, you have to do what we say, our range cons say, and if you don't, these are the things that we can impose upon you. And so when the ranchers would go out, become in violation because they couldn't survive anymore under their regulation, then they would pull them in a federal court, and they'd say, the Bureau of Land Management would say to the judge, look, judge, so-and-so, rancher so-and-so signed this. He said he would do this, this, and this, and this. He hasn't done that. He signed it and agreed to it. So therefore, judge, you have to do this, this, and this. And the judge would go, yep, you're right. Slam the mallet down. And my dad would never allow himself to be in that situation. He would never sign a grazing contract, and it put him outside the authority of the federal government. Because the federal government only has authority under contractual law when it comes to the land and resources. And they have basically buffaloed people all over the West into believing that they own the land and that you are the leasee, the renter. And therefore you have to sign a rental contract. And that is absolutely incorrect. And it is false. And they have done it deceptively. They have done it over many decades and through generational gaps, because our forefathers knew dang well that they owned those ranches and that they owned the grass on them. They understood the principles of multiple use, meaning that they owned, it was vested property. That grass was theirs. It was their property. They could sell it, trade it, borrow against it. And if someone came to steal it, they could stop them with force because it was theirs. And it was through just years of deception and generational gaps that the federal land agencies transferred this right and buffaloed the people to believe that it's a privilege, that they own it and now they're going to lease it back to you. And we sign it away. And until you stop signing those, I tell you the grazing issues because that's what I know and experience. But I hope that you could see and relate to the same tactics and issues in whatever you're fighting. Whether it's water, lumber, the dams, mining, it's the same type of tactics. They're literally converting your rights and saying they're not your rights, they're a privilege, and we own them. So therefore, you have to do what we say. You have to sign our contracts. And until we understand that they're not their rights, that we can't even fight this battle. We don't even understand this battle if we think they're their rights. And so that was the stand that my dad That was the principles that my dad stood on. And he tried to get all the other ranchers. And they're like, no, we can't stand against the federal government. We can't do that. We'll lose our ranches. We'll lose our heritage. And so, 25 years later, we see who was right. My dad is the last rancher in southern Nevada. Every single one of them are gone now. Because they tried to negotiate, they tried to create committees and associations, they hired lawyers, and every single one of them are gone now, except my dad. Because my dad says, no, these are my rights, and you will not take them. So now, there's still more to this story, right?
What were the other things he did?
Thank you. So, thanks for the reminder, seriously, because it's very important. I said I would mention three things. One was he wouldn't sign the contracts. He would not say that someone else owned them. He said, these are mine, and he was claiming them as his. Second, he called on the state and the county sheriff, okay, to protect. Okay? Now, I want you to understand that they never ever really did, at least to the full level. But he did reach the county sheriff several times and met with them and explained to them that these are my rights. I have inherited or purchased these rights, and they've been in my family for many generations. And I've continually beneficially used these rights. I've improved them, and they're mine. And, there could have been a lot of legal talk back and forth, but he made it very clear to the sheriff that you are elected for only one reason, and it's not to give people on a county road a ticket. You are elected for one reason, and that reason is to protect the individual rights in your county. I remember hearing talk about that these are my rights, and so it is your duty to protect them. And it's interesting, in the sheriff's oath, when he takes an oath to defend against those both domestic and foreign. Isn't that interesting? He doesn't take an oath to defend, somewhere else. He takes an oath to defend right here, right in your county. So he understood that. And the sheriff did because the sheriff would be like, they would go back to the federal government and say, look, I really don't want this in my county, So for almost 20 years, there was communication between the federal agencies and the sheriff, and it did help protect my dad's rights. And of course, he called on the states, and the states pretty much just ignored him, or assisted the federal government. But that was the second thing he did. And the third thing, he was very public about everything he did. He wrote letters and got the media involved, and always very public. But the third thing that he did is he always made sure that it was clear that he was going to defend his rights, that he was going to call his friends together if he had to, and he was going to defend his rights. And he would use the terminology, I will do whatever it takes. And that's what he would say. And they would say, well, what does that mean? And he would say, whatever it takes. And they would say, well, what does whatever it takes means? And he would say, whatever it takes. And they would try to get it, it drove them crazy. So, we know that actually in 2012, the federal government actually they began to do what they were going to do in 2014, and that was stopped by the sheriff. The sheriff said, no, you don't have things right legally, and therefore you've got to go back to the court and get some things done before you can have my blessing on it. So they did do that. They went back to the court, and of course the federal court gave them what they wanted. And then in 2014, one of the days counts. We know that there was at least 214 or 13 armed agents that came up on the ranch and surrounded our ranch. We know that 145 of them, or 43 of them, were actually fully, tactical, trained men, and that there was 19 contractors, and the rest were like the support team. And they surrounded our ranch with snipers on the hills, high-tech surveillance equipment, and they began to threaten our family and say things like, if you resist in any way, this will be another Waco or Ruby Ridge. They said things to the very direct that we will kill you. The snipers, we later got their operating plans, going through court and trial. We got their operating plans, and their operating plans make it very clear that this was a military type operation, that they used military command systems, and that they used military equipment and gear, and that even the U.S. attorney in court had to admit that this was a military type operation, and that they had snipers on the hills, that they were in a 360 degrees surveillance, and that they were issued government rifles with optics, and that they had the authority to use lethal force if lethal force was imminent. Basically, that's what it said. And this was, my family. I could go into a lot of details about what happened, but ultimately, we kind of came together as a family, and there was, at the beginning, we really thought that they were going to kill us, and we had every reason to believe they were literally threatening. They were everywhere they went. They would be in a convoy, of 4 or 5 or 6 armed vehicles escorting, like the contract cowboys, equipment, truck, trailer, whatever. And it was just amazing. They had helicopters. They had locked down the whole range and had guards on each road going out off the main road. And I do not have time here to tell you all the details of what they were going to do, or what they were doing. Ultimately, it was calving season, and they were running the cows really hard with helicopters and leaving the baby calves out in the desert. And they were actually killing several of the cows, just running them to death. When everything was said and done, they had dug a huge pit and were just throwing the dead cattle in there. They were shooting our prize bulls and other cattle from the air, from helicopters. And the agent in charge, Dan Love, said that I can do whatever I want with these cattle. They're government property. And he said, I can shoot them and throw them in a pit if I want. And those are his own words. So that happened. And the interesting thing was we didn't know what we were going to do. We were just praying and asking for guidance and protection and direction. And we came together as a family, and we began to pray and plead with the Lord to help us and bless us. And things started to evolve where we were able to make little stands. A little stand here and a little stand there. And people started seeing that locally at first, and they started to gather. And more people. And then on Wednesday, they were coming down out of the mountains, and they were there was 13 armed vehicles, and they were escorting a dump truck pulling a backhoe. And this concerned us. We didn't know. We thought it was either a rendering truck, or we thought that they were up there, destroying something. And basically, again, to make a long story short, we protested them as they began to come on the road. And they got out of their vehicles with their dogs and began to sick their dogs on us.